Joining us now, I don't know what to talk about with him, to be honest with you. Is anything going on?
Yeah, not really.
All right.
Not really.
Let's have him on anyway. NFL Network insider, our buddy in his usual Friday spot, Tom Pelissero. How are you, Tom?
I'm still here, Rich. It's been a week in the NFL.
Honestly,
my boys in the studio before I forget.
Okay, very good.
Hey, Tommy P.
Honestly, for how long you've done this, Tom, nothing touches this week, right? This week is off the charts,
correct.
right?
You know, I think that, everybody talks about Black Monday and, the day after the season. What we've seen in recent years is there's a lot, there's sometimes one or two that happen during the season. This year there were three. And then, there's other years where you have this kind of aftershocks that happen. And increasingly we've seen these aftershocks. They're normally not earthquakes, though. We are now entering an NFL hiring cycle. We're in the thick of it already, in which among the names potentially available to go to new teams, Mike Vrabel, Jim Harbaugh, Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll. All right, these are luminaries in the sport. These are big-time names, big-time coaches, and we'll see where the dust settles with all of these. But, in another year, we'd be talking about Ben Johnson. Where's he going to go? That'd be the number one story in this hiring cycle. This year, it's Belichick, Carroll, Harbaugh, Vrabel. This is unusual. It's also an amazing test case because it's the first year where we've got new rules on the cadence of the hiring process as well, with in-person interviews with NFL assistants pushed back. So everybody already was kind of feeling their way through this new process. Now all of a sudden you plop in a bunch of coaches of this caliber, and everybody right now is trying simultaneously to go through the process the way they were planning to do it, but also understanding there's new things literally happening in real time here.
And in terms of the cadence that the league has set out to kind of slow the process down, that's where I'll start with you, is why are the Patriots able to hire Jerod Mayo so quickly, even though it hasn't been officially announced as you and I are conversing right now, Tom?
So under the Rooney Rule, teams are currently required to interview 2 external minority candidates for any high-level position, whether that's a head coach or a general manager. The exceptions to the rule, there's 2 of them. One is if you make the coaching change after March 1st. That's what we saw a couple of years ago with Todd Bowles taking over for Bruce Arians, because realistically at that point, you're talking about teams are already way down the line, and saying you're going to bring people in and do a whole process doesn't really make sense. The other exception to that rule is if you, in writing, put that somebody is the successor to the job. And it doesn't matter if they're black, white, whatever. If you put that in writing that you are the planned successor, you're allowed to step into that job. And there have been other examples of this. One of the more recent ones was Eric DeCosta taking over for Ozzie Newsome. If you have it in writing that you're the successor, there's not a Rooney Rule requirement. You don't have to go through a search process. You can simply be elevated. And certainly there was a belief that this was in Jerod Mayo's contract going all the way back to about a year ago at this time, when the Patriots did something highly unusual for the organization, which was send out a press release saying we are working on a contract, not even done. We are working on a contract with Jerod Mayo to keep him with the team for years to come. And also, we have now brought aboard Bill O'Brien as our new offensive coordinator. The Patriots normally don't announce that the sun came up today. They won't confirm anything publicly like that. The fact that they intentionally put that out there, it signaled a couple of things. One, Jerod Mayo very clearly was the successor to Bill Belichick. But secondly, it also was evidence of what we've seen is an erosion of power that Bill Belichick had long had within the organization. And Robert Kraft, Jonathan Kraft, had been increasingly involved in football matters. There were certain things that Bill Belichick has always had in his contract, 53-man roster control. The team can't hire a general manager. But in terms of control over individual members of the coaching staff, non-football hires and things like that, those were not technically under Bill Belichick's purview. And when you look back at in recent years here, why things went the direction that they did in New England, there were a bunch of reasons for that. The number of valuable members of their coaching staff and front office who had left is certainly part of the equation here. Bill Belichick did not have the help that he had had in prior years, but also there was certainly a belief from Belichick's side, as far as I understand it, that he was no longer able to function the way that he had on the way to 6 Super Bowls. That's part of the reason when they had these conversations here, specifically on Monday and then carried into the next couple of days. things just weren't able to get on the same page for them to move forward together.
What do you mean by that? Because I know those who would listening and might have a little bit of the cynicism in them would be, the things that he didn't have to operate the way that he's used to operating there in New England is named Tom and Brady. But what else? I mean, seriously, what else are you referring to that led to this remarkable parting of the ways, Tom?
Go down the list of people, Rich, who have gotten jobs out of the Patriots organization. And of course, everybody makes jokes of, okay, it was all Belichick, it's all Brady, these guys come out of that. And why do people keep hiring out of that tree? But when you lose Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler and Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn and Joe Judge, at least for a bit there, Nick Caserio goes to Houston. You can go down the rest of the list. Jack Easterby going to Houston, who was a key part of the operational thing. All these people who had been a part of this network that Bill had kind of overseen, all of a sudden he didn't have that same level of expertise working with him to put all the various systems and processes in place that Belichick had been used to. And again, I know I said some names in that sentence that people are going to roll their eyes at, but you're talking about the difference between those people going and trying to set a similar program someplace else, and those people knowing specifically how they function within the Bill Belichick universe. When you have, and really New England is the only one that's truly like this in the NFL, because yes, Pete Carroll had 53-man roster control. He technically had veto power. He hired John Schneider. But nobody had more authority over every aspect of the football operation than Bill Belichick in New England, which works. Yes, it helps when you have the greatest player of all time on your side. They tried to find the next guy in Mac Jones a couple of years ago. There's a bunch of reasons things did not go well. They also gave Mac Jones 3 different offensive coordinators, because Josh McDaniels, 4 if you count the two-headed monster from last year. They had Josh McDaniels, then it was Patricia and Judge. Then this year it's Bill O'Brien. So you're switching schemes, you're switching systems. Again, there's this massive brain drain that happened within the organization. And when it relies on one person to oversee all of it, and suddenly you have less experienced people doing a lot of those jobs, whether it's on the field or off the field, it just leads to some other things falling by the wayside. You saw that reflected in personnel. You saw that reflected at times in terms of what was left of the coaching staff, and you certainly saw it in the win-loss column where they were 4-13.
So, what is Belichick's next maneuver? What do you think he's going to do, Tom?
Bill Belichick wants to coach. He did not say that. He did not take questions from reporters, which I understood, Rich, because Bill went out. He made like his 5-minute speech to the media, and then he could do just the okay, we'll see you later thing, as opposed to all right, let's take questions for Bill. Bill, where are you going next? Yeah, we're here to talk about today. You know how that would have gone. It would have been 10 uncomfortable minutes after that. So Bill wasn't going to address his future, but Robert Kraft made that very clear that, hey, it's going to be hard seeing him in a cutoff hoodie, coaching someplace else. He wants to coach in 2024. He wants to continue pursuing the all-time wins record, which, depending if you're looking at the regular season one or the total one, it's going to take realistically 2 or 3 years to be able to get there. He's going to need to go, though, talking about the processes and the way that things were set up in New England for so long, where he's able not necessarily to run things exactly the same, because, again, I don't know that you can set up a program the way that the Patriots did 24 years ago in the modern NFL, but he's going to want to know that the structure of the organization, the resources, and his ability to do his job the way that he's done it and the way that he knows how to win is going to be putting him in a position to have success at that next stop. So, we all know some of the names that have been out there in terms of potential landing spots. Atlanta is certainly one. It makes a lot of sense. You got an 81-year-old owner in Arthur Blank who just ran out of patience on what was supposed to be a long-term bill with Arthur Smith. They have gotten a lot better on defense. They have put talent at the skill spots. They've not yet invested in a quarterback, which regardless who is the coach there is going to be the next step here in 2024. I've heard the Chargers bandied about. I don't really foresee that. I've heard the Raiders. I don't really foresee that.
What about Washington? I mean, Washington, the issue there also is he would go there and he's got a second overall pick. He could get a young stud, to go and coach up and, kind of be the Popovich here, right, to get his Wembanyama. I don't know if Drake May would be that guy, or if Caleb would even drop to him at 2, or they go get up to number 1 because the Bears might stick with Justin Fields. You know what I mean? Like, coaching the NFC East. That one with a new owner that's going to put a ton of money into the. You're not wondering about the continuity there, and you're not worried about the money there of the ownership structure and resources. That's for sure. In DC,
Well,
Tom.
you're probably wondering about the structure of the football operation. If it's Adam Peters who ends up being the head of football operations, which has been the belief in the league for months that he was going to end up getting that job. That's somebody who did work in New England. He's got a relationship with Bill Belichick. Everything I've been told is that it's not likely that Bill Belichick is going to end up in Washington, just for a variety of different reasons, the vision for how they want to build that program. But you say nothing's impossible, Rich, because we're talking about arguably the greatest coach of all time. Every owner should be looking at this and just going, okay, Bill Belichick's currently available. He's 72 years old. But do we need to think about this? Do we at least need to have a conversation about this? And I think that, while this press conference was going to happen at some point and all parties didn't want it to drag on, I certainly think from Bill Belichick's perspective, one thing he's going to want to do is see how these games go this weekend and see whether or not potentially something else could shake free. You're talking about better teams. If they're in the playoffs, they're probably closer to winning. I don't foresee Bill Belichick taking over a total rebuild operation, which is why I don't anticipate it being Washington. I don't really think it's Carolina. I think it's got to be a team that's a little bit closer here. You take nothing off the table, but Belichick's going to want to know, too, who am I working with? How involved is the owner going to be? Is there a team president or somebody else high up the food chain that I'm going to be answering to? All these are questions that Belichick is going to interview teams about as much as they are interviewing him for these potential jobs. We'll see exactly what that ends up being. But again, you've got a lot of big names and a lot of moving parts in this entire thing. And there's also some teams that, knowing those new restrictions and the fact that you can't do in-person interviews with current NFL assistants until January 22nd, want to at least get a little bit further in this process before they decide to move forward. Though all you have to do, Rich, is interview a couple of minority coaches who are not currently employed, or college coaches, anyone other than NFL assistants. You could have fulfilled the Rooney Rule and then pounce on Belichick or Vrabel or one of these other guys right now.
Tom Pelissero, my God, we could talk for another half an hour here, but let me try and condense some of this down. My colleague from NFL Network right here on the Rich Eisen Show. I know it feels like 15 years ago, but why did Vrabel and the Titans part ways? I mean, what happened there, Tom?
We talked about it, Rich, on game day morning on Sunday, and my understanding was they were going to speak after the season was over and try to figure out if there was how they could possibly move forward together. There was a lot that was swirling out there in terms of reports about his frustration, people like Michael Lombardi on his podcast saying, I don't think he likes the setup. And of course, there's a New England connection to Lombardi there. There were, there's a lot of noise, him going to New England and saying the things that he did. And some of those other things that just didn't land well, he never addressed it. My understanding was, this is what we wrote and talked about, he never went to ownership or the other Titans brass and said, hey, I got a problem with Rand Carthon, or I got a problem with the structure. He never talked about the alignment. And him and Rand Carthon never had blow-ups. It wasn't anything like that. But when you have this much noise, Rich, you would think at some point, if somebody writes a story saying Tom Pelissero really doesn't like working with Rich Eisen, I'd probably call you and go, yeah, that's a bunch of BS. Like, don't worry about that. They never confronted it publicly or privately. And so it just left everyone going, what is the deal here? When you see those buzzwords that Amy Adams Strunk used in her statement and in her in-house media interview with the voice of the Titans, Mike Keith, she kept talking about collaboration and alignment. It was very clear that while Vrabel and Rand may have been friendly and they got along well enough, they weren't working together. They were not collaborative. They wanted a different environment around that team. You've spent time around Vrabel. I've met Vrabel. He is I don't even know how to describe him. He is a unique individual. He's an excellent, excellent football coach, but also somebody who's going to bow up a lot with things he doesn't like. He's going to have his way of doing things, and he's going to want to proceed like that. They weren't on the same page. Vrabel was frustrated with the roster. He was plainly frustrated with some other things. Amy Adams Strunk did something that you don't see very often, which is flat out firing a really, really good football coach. And we'll see now with Rand Carthon running the operation there in terms of a coaching search, what direction they go. I would bet you this, Rich. as they're going through this, and we've seen them request a lot of the hot offensive names. We've also seen them request guys like Aaron Glenn and Antonio Pierce and Dan Quinn, Raheem Morris. Those guys are probably going to be more the types of leaders that you see with DeMeco Ryans in Houston. They're going to be a little bit more type A, I don't want to say rah-rah, but along those lines. You're going to have a different type of an energy than you had with Vrabel. And I think, that leader of men type, even though Vrabel would also fit in that category, that's probably the direction that Tennessee is going to be leaning.
Well, and then Amy Adams Strunk mentioned how there was a possibility of there being a trade for Vrabel, but that would process too long to potentially go and get someone for Vrabel. And then hours later, literally the next day, Pete Carroll doesn't survive him competing for staying the coach in Seattle, to use his language. He's out. And I'm wondering if Dan Quinn's the through line here, because if Quinn is in play, he was last year, but the Titans had Vrabel, and they were definitely keeping with Pete Carroll in Seattle last year. I'm just wondering if is there any connective tissue here as to why suddenly Pete was out? What happened there? Tom.
It's not a direct line to Dan Quinn. It's not as simple as Pete's out, Dan's in. I would certainly anticipate, knowing the relationship, John Schneider's going to want to interview Dan Quinn. A lot of people want to interview Dan Quinn, and I think that he's a real candidate in a place like Tennessee. He's a real candidate in Washington. He's got slips from Carolina and the Chargers. There's a bunch of places where Dan Quinn is going to be in the mix. Now, I would also say Seattle for 14 years under Pete Carroll established a pretty cool culture in terms of just like the way that they have this competitive energy, this positivity, the way that they do things. Like, maybe you're looking for something a little bit different in this regard, just in terms of like how you hold people accountable, the style of football you play. Because we all know Pete wanted to avoid turnovers, play really good defense, and then we'll cut it loose in the fourth quarter if we have to. Maybe you shift away from that a little bit, but you're not going to see this massive swing away culturally, I don't believe, in Seattle. That doesn't mean that you have to get somebody who's been there before, because Dan Quinn would be the frontline guy in that. But I know this, John Schneider, when you have a 72-year-old head coach, you're always kind of evaluating, having a list ready if at some point Pete wanted to walk away, or the Seahawks, in this case, wanted to move on. So I would anticipate he's going to interview all the hot names. They haven't put out their interview slips yet, which, by the way, and I learned this, Rich, through the course of this wild past week here.
Yes.
There's a process actually even before you put the slips out in terms of writing the job description now. The league has to approve it. Then they have to post the job, not on like monster.com, but they have to like post it internally. Yeah. And there's like a bunch of rules there. So until they approve the language and it's posted, you can't even put out the slips. So that's where you've got some of these delays that have happened in recent days. It's not that the Seahawks are ill prepared for the moment. They'll be ready to go here. And for Pete Carroll, I would say this, Rich, it reminded me of 2008. March 6, 2008, when Brett Favre retired for the first time. And Brett was tearful, and I was at that press conference at Lambeau Field, which shows how long I've been doing this stuff. And he said, I know I can still play, but I don't think I want to. Pete Carroll goes to the podium on, I think it was Tuesday, I've lost track of days, and says, I competed hard. I'm happy. I'm happy for the organization. I'm going to be here for you. Johnny Schneider, you're my guy. It's been 14 years. You really get to do this thing now. But, hey, I'm ready to go, and I'm fired up for what's next. To me, that was Pete walking a very fine line. I thought it was the classiest, most genuine goodbye from a really classy, genuine individual. But I did not read that as a goodbye for Pete Carroll to coaching. And if the right job is there in a place that he wants to be, with a team he thinks has an opportunity to win right now, I would not be shocked at all, Rich, if we see Pete Carroll on an NFL sideline again.
Wow, gosh. I mean, this is insane. And then let's get to Harbaugh. What's the latest here? I know what.
I thought you were going to run out the clock on this.
No, I'm not running out of clock. I'm having you as long as you're willing to sit there, Tom. I mean, we've barely scratched the surface here. This is the most insane. That's what I said. The coaching carousel is drunk. It is spun off its axis, and you look out your front window of your house, you're watching it roll down the street, because this isn't.
This is water. I'm not drunk.
So what's the latest with Jim Harbaugh, Tom?
Jim Harbaugh is celebrating, as I'm sure you are still too, Rich.
I
been
am
on cloud nine for about 4 days here. Jim Harbaugh, during, you got that big chunk of time right between the Big Ten title game and the college football playoff. He was definitely, making calls. He was updating staff lists. He was evaluating potential openings. He has continued, from my understanding, to do that through the course of this week. It is certainly in play that Jim Harbaugh could end up in the NFL. We talked about this, I remember, on the show last week. I brought up two teams, the Raiders and the Chargers. I would still bring up those two teams. It certainly seems, just based upon how the processes have gone so far, that the Chargers at this point probably seem like they're more in play for Jim Harbaugh. But when you're talking about a coach of this caliber, I don't think that you take anybody off the table until they ultimately go in a different direction. I think that the other thing to remember with Jim Harbaugh was, the last couple of years, things played out rather publicly. 2 years ago, he interviews twice with the Vikings, including in person for like 6 hours on National Signing Day. And then, through the course of that day, the Vikings realized, what, this is not a fit. Harbaugh gets on the plane. He tells Michigan, I'm coming back. They hire Kevin O'Connell that night. Last year with Denver, he did the initial Zoom. And then they were like, hey, we want to bring you in for in person. And Jim was just thinking, like, why do I have to go and do that? So the Penners ended up flying to go see him a week later. The point is, I think this time around, if Jim Harbaugh is going to get a job, to the extent that they can, they're going to keep it as quiet as possible for as long as possible, right up until the point that Jim Harbaugh is flying there, and if all goes well, he becomes the head coach of the football team. We know that Michigan fans, and I'm sure the administration, are exhausted by this annual exercise. We know that they've had a couple of large contract offers on the table for Jim Harbaugh to keep him at Michigan for the long haul. Jim is always driven by that next mountain to climb. He climbed a really big one, winning a national championship. The one left out there for him is the Super Bowl. He also lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I believe his parents have like the house behind him, like
Correct.
their backyards are connected. He sees them all the time. Is he gonna move to LA right now? As alluring as it is, when it comes right down to it, is he gonna do it? That's really the question here. And we'll see here over the next week or two exactly what direction that goes.
Well, we're resting easily while we're exhausted. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is the previous years was like, yeah, what if he leaves? We haven't done it yet. Everyone's resting easy and celebrating it. I've got two more for you, Tom, because you mentioned this is unprecedented. Bill Belichick is available. I mean, that is not a misprint, right? You mentioned Pete Carroll. Would be available for the right job. Mike Vrabel, 2 seasons removed from being coach of the year, is available. Jim Harbaugh is available. Bears fans are freaking out that they stayed put with Matt Eberflus, with all due respect to the coach. So why did they do that, and how does it inform you on their plans for Justin Fields about what they did, Tom?
The Bears had lengthy, intensive meetings for a couple of days after the season. Matt Eberflus was a part of those meetings. They had to figure out, what the best path forward was for the organization. So they looked at everything. Kevin Warren, the new team president, was part of that. He is very methodical, wants to talk about every different scenario. Based upon the improvement that they showed over the second half of the season, especially on defense, they just kind of came to the conclusion that this is going to be the best direction to go. Now, the Bears' offense wasn't terrible, by the way. They were second in the league in rushing, even though they played with an undrafted rookie quarterback from Division II, Tyson Bagent, for a good chunk of the year. It's not like it was just Justin Fields running wild on everybody. They were top 10 most of the season, third downs in red zone. This certainly, Rich, I would say points to them going a different direction at the quarterback position at a time that they're sitting there with the number one pick and the opportunity to go draft somebody that can quickly make Bears fans feel okay if you're moving on from the dynamic abilities but inconsistent play of Justin Fields. I know Ryan Poles left the door open on that possibility when he spoke to reporters. It certainly seems like things are pointing that direction. They're going to continue to go through the process. Caleb Williams hasn't even declared yet for the draft.
Yeah,
Every expectation is that he will. Drake May has declared.
That's Monday, right, Tom? You got to do that by Monday, correct? Is that the date by which you must declare?
don't hold me to the date because I got a lot of dates in my head right now, Rich. But yes, it's upcoming. The early declare deadline was to make you eligible for all-star games, which Caleb Williams was never going to do. We'll see if we see him at the combine or anything else through the course of this process. But yes, you have to declare later on this month for the NFL draft. They'll have that answer pretty quickly here. And then it's going to be a matter of, okay, if it is a Caleb Williams, how do we put the right offensive coordinator with him to maximize his talents and make him feel good about coming to Chicago?
It is Monday, by the way, January 15th. You got to make that announcement. And obviously, all of us Michigan folk are looking to see if J.J. McCarthy is going to make that announcement as well. Maybe Saturday's the day, with the parade being planned over the weekend in Ann Arbor, keeping an eye on that. So here's the last one for you. You made reference before that maybe Belichick is going to wait around to see the results of this weekend's Super Wild Card Weekend contests. And there's been one surprise after another, and that would be one last one for sure. Can you crystal ball or give me your 2 cents, however you're comfortable, as to which teams might actually have a result on Super Wild Card Weekend that would make them join the larger group of teams looking for a new head coach, Tom? Give me one.
I would say this. I think we all know, Rich, which teams we feel like are far enough in with their current administrations or have had sufficient frustration throughout the course of the season that if they wash out in the first round of the playoffs, something is going to have to change. In places like Buffalo, that's pretty easy to see what potentially could change. They already had fired their offensive coordinator this year. They don't have a defensive coordinator. You can make, a lot of changes in that regard. We know that there's intense scrutiny right now on the Eagles. They've already made a change in terms of who's calling the plays on defense. They quite possibly could be a change, and already has been collaboration in terms of who's calling the plays on offense. There's always going to be focus on the Dallas Cowboys, despite the fact that Mike McCarthy has to be sitting there going, what more do I have to do besides obviously winning playoff games? He's the first Cowboys coach ever to win 12 games in 3 consecutive seasons. He took over as the play caller, and they've gotten so much better on that side of the ball. He's put him in that position. But, Rich, when it comes down to it, these are the biggest moments. These are the moments that can turn franchises' fortunes, and one bad bounce and you lose a bad game, or you just have a bad day at the office and things get away from you. Real quickly, feelings can change. And so it'll be a fascinating 3 days of football coming up, and we'll see where we are Sunday, Monday, Tuesday morning.
And then the cherry on top of all that, for the lack of a better phrase, is that there's never been this experienced and big-name coaches all in one available pot for teams to go dip into and hire them. Belichick's available, Harbaugh's available, Vrabel's available, Pete Carroll is available. That is nuts, Tom, and I appreciate you going soup to nuts right here on the show, as always.
Thanks, Rich.
You bet. That's the great Tom Pelissero right here on The Rich Eisen Show. Catch The Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.